Imagine a scream, not of pain, but of something changing, something impossible. What if the person you thought you knew suddenly wasn't? Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. The Navajo speak of a dark secret, a taboo magic that allows a person to become something else. They speak of this. Tonight, we delve into 5 absolutely chilling, true accounts from individuals who claim to have witnessed the unthinkable, human beings morphing into something utterly non-human. These aren't myths from ancient texts. These are modern accounts of grotesque shifts that will leave you absolutely speechless. Prepare yourselves. The veil between worlds is about to be torn away. Story 1. My brother's bones. The sound that woke me wasn't a scream, but a quiet, rhythmic cracking, like a bundle of dry twigs being slowly and deliberately snapped one by one. I was 12 years old, and my older brother, 17-year-old Ethan, had convinced our parents to let us camp in the backyard. It was a clear, moonless night on the edge of the Arizona desert, the sky a dizzying spray of stars. We had told ghost stories until our voices were hoarse, and now, in the deep silence of 3 a.m., I was listening to a sound that was far more terrifying than any tale we had told. I carefully unzipped my sleeping bag, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The cracking was coming from Ethan's tent, just a few feet from mine. I peered through the mesh window, and in the faint starlight I could see his silhouette. He was on his hands and knees, his back arched at a painful, unnatural angle, and he was shaking, a series of violent, full-body tremors. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. The cracking sound grew louder, more insistent, punctuated by a low, guttural moan. That was not a sound of pain, but of effort. It was the sound of a body fighting against itself. His back arched even higher, and I heard a wet, tearing sound, like thick canvas ripping. His spine was elongating, the vertebrae audibly popping and shifting under his skin. Pushing the fabric of his t-shirt taut, he was growing. I should have run. I should have screamed for my parents, but I was frozen, a child's terrified curiosity overriding every instinct for self-preservation. This had to be a nightmare. It had to be. But the smell that began to drift from his tent was realer, coppery, metallic scent of blood and the dusty, musky odor of wet animal fur. His limbs began to change. His arms thinned and stretched, the bones in his forearms cracking and fusing with a sickening crunch. His hands flattened, the fingers elongating and curling into gnarled, claw-like shapes. He was panting now, ragged, animalistic breaths, his head hanging low. I watched, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing, as his legs buckled and rearranged themselves, the knees bending backward, forcing him into a low, predatory crouch. The most horrific part was his face. He slowly lifted his head, and his features began to melt and shift, like wax held too close to a flame. His nose and jaw pushed forward, stretching into a lean, canine snout. His teeth elongated into sharp, yellowed fangs. But his eyes, for a terrifying moment, they were still Ethan's eyes. They were wide with a silent, pleading agony. A final spark of my brother's humanity trapped inside a monstrous, changing shell. He looked right at me, a single tear tracing a path through the sprouting grey fur on his cheek. And then the spark was gone, replaced by a flat, cold, predatory intelligence. The thing that had been my brother let out a low, rumbling growl and took a lurching, awkward step, still learning to use its new, alien anatomy. It was a coyote, but wrong in every conceivable way. It was too large, its limbs too long, its movements a jerky, unnatural parody of a real animal. It turned and, with a final, silent look back at my tent, it slipped out of its own and vanished into the darkness of the desert. I was found the next morning by my mother, catatonic, huddled in my sleeping bag. Ethan's tent was empty, save for his shredded clothes and a faint, lingering smell of blood and wet fur. The official story became that Ethan had run away, a troubled teen who had finally snapped. They searched for weeks, but they never found him. I never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? But I know the truth. The ghost stories we told that night, they weren't just stories. We had been careless with our words, with the ancient land we lived on. We had invited something in, and it had answered. It had chosen Ethan. I am an adult now, but I never outgrew the fear of that night. Sometimes, on quiet, moonless nights, I'll see a large, grey coyote standing at the edge of my property. Its movements just a little too jerky, its eyes a little too intelligent. And sometimes I'll hear a voice on the wind, a perfect, chilling mimicry of my brother's. It whispers my name, inviting me to come out and play, just like we used to. But I know what's waiting for me in the dark, and I know that it's still wearing my brother's bones. Story 2. The old woman at the rest stop as a long-haul trucker. You learn to categorize the strange things you see on the empty highways of the Southwest. There's road fatigues, strange. Heat haze, strange. And then there's what I saw at a desolate rest stop off I-40 in New Mexico, which belongs to a category all its own. The kind of strange that rewrites the rules of reality and leaves a permanent, ragged tear in your soul. I had pulled over just after midnight to stretch my legs and let the engine cool. The place was deserted, a single sodium lamp casting a sickly, orange glow over the empty parking lot and the small, cinder-block bathroom building. As I stepped out of my cab, I saw her, an old woman, impossibly frail, huddled on a bench near the vending machines. She was wearing a thin, floral print dress, completely inadequate for the cold desert night, and she was shivering. My first thought was that she was a stranded traveler. Maybe her car had broken down. I walked over, keeping a respectful distance. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need some help?" She looked up, and her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes a pale, cloudy blue. She gave me a weak, grateful smile. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "My son, he was supposed to pick me up hours ago. I think he's forgotten me. Every instinct I had was screaming at me. The story was wrong. The time was wrong. The place was wrong. but she looked so pathetic, so helpless. I offered her a bottle of water and the blanket from my cab. As I draped it over her shoulders, my fingers brushed against her skin. It was cold. Not just cool from the night air, but a deep, unnatural, reptilian cold. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. She just smiled that same weak smile. "You're a kind boy," she whispered, and then her head began to twitch. It was a small, jerky movement, a violent, uncontrollable tick that snapped her head to the side. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of confusion, then terror. "Oh no," she whimpered, her cloudy eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Not now. Please, not here." Her body was seized by a violent convulsion. She was thrown from the bench onto the asphalt, her frail limbs thrashing. I thought she was having a seizure and fumbled for my phone to call 911, but this was no seizure. Her bones began to crack and pop, a sound like a bag of walnuts being crushed under a boot. Her spine arched backwards, lifting her off the ground, her back bending at an angle that was humanly impossible. Her flowery dress ripped at the seams, unable to contain the grotesque, shifting form beneath it. Her limbs stretched, the skin pulling taut, the bones audibly snapping and reforming. Her legs bent the wrong way, like a bird's, and her arms thinned, the flesh seeming to melt away, leaving long, spindly appendages that scraped against the asphalt. The transformation was happening with a horrifying, unnatural speed, a rapid, jerky unfolding, like a time-lapse video of a flower blooming in reverse. She let out a sound, but it wasn't a human scream. It was a hype, chittering shriek that was layered with a dozen different animal cries: the yip of a coyote, the hiss of a snake, the cry of a hawk. Her face, the last bastion of her humanity, began to collapse in on itself, the nose and mouth pushing forward, the skin darkening and sprouting coarse, patchy fur. For a moment, she was a horrifying hybrid, a thing of nightmare, with the body of a twisted, canine creature and the terrified, weeping eyes of a forgotten old woman. Then the eyes changed, the cloudy blue hardening into a sharp, malevolent, glowing yellow. The thing that had been a helpless old woman scrambled to its feet. It was a coyote, but monstrously large, its fur matted, and its limbs disproportionately long and thin. It stood on the broken, rearranged bones of its former host, its new body still twitching, still settling. It turned its head and looked directly at me, not with the eyes of a wild animal, but with a cold, ancient, and deeply intelligent contempt. It opened its long snout, and from its throat came a perfect, reedy whisper in the old woman's voice. "He never forgets." Then it turned and loped into the darkness of the desert, its gait a lurching, unnatural rhythm. As if it were still getting used to the stolen legs, it ran on. I was left alone in the sickly orange glow of the rest stop, with an empty blanket, a spilled bottle of water, and a shattered understanding of the world. I never stop on that stretch of I-40 at night anymore, but my job is to drive, so I see the signs. I see the coyotes that watch my rig pass by, their heads held a little too high, their gaze a little too intelligent. And sometimes, over the crackle of the CB radio, I'll hear a faint, reedy whisper, an old woman's voice asking if her son is coming soon. And I just keep driving, because I know that what I saw wasn't just a monster. I had witnessed a changing of the guard, a handoff, and the haunting echo it left behind is a constant, terrifying reminder that some things on these lonely roads are not stranded. They're just waiting for their ride. Story 3. The hunting trip. My Uncle Thomas didn't die of a heart attack on a hunting trip, like the official report says. I was there. I saw what happened. He was taken not by a failing body, but by a hungry, patient predator that had been wearing his skin long before his heart ever stopped beating. We were on our annual elk hunt, deep in the mountains of Colorado, a place so remote that the world of cell phones and civilization felt like a distant dream. Thomas was my hero, a quiet, stoic man who knew the woods better than he knew himself. But that year, he was different. He was gaunt, his eyes holding a strange, feverish light. He was quieter than usual, and he had developed a habit of standing at the edge of our campsite for hours, just staring into the dense, dark pines, as if waiting for someone. My dad and I attributed it to stress, to getting older. We were wrong. On the third day, a strange fog rolled in, thick and unnaturally cold for early autumn. It swallowed the landscape, reducing our world to a few dozen feet of visibility. It was in this fog that Thomas began to change. We were tracking a set of elk prints when he stopped dead, his head cocked. You hear that he whispered, but his voice was wrong. It was thin, raspy, and had a strange, resonant quality, like a voice echoing in a cave. We heard nothing but the muffled silence of the fog. Thomas's eyes, his familiar, kind brown eyes, began to change. The color seemed to drain from them, replaced by a flat obsidian black, the pupils dilating until they consumed the iris entirely. They were no longer the eyes of a man. They were the flat, predatory eyes of a hunter. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid of him. "We need to go deeper," he said, his voice now a low, guttural rasp. He started walking, not following the elk tracks, but heading directly into the thickest, most impenetrable part of the woods. My dad, sensing something was terribly wrong, called out to him, "Tom, wait, that's not the way." Thomas stopped and slowly turned his head. He smiled, but it was a horrifying, predatory grimace, all teeth and no warmth. "It is for me," he rasped, and then his body began to shift. It wasn't a fast, violent transformation. It was a slow, deliberate, and deeply unsettling unfolding. His shoulders broadened, the muscles in his back and arms bunching and swelling under his flannel shirt, with a sound like thick leather stretching. His neck elongated, and his head seemed to sink into his shoulders. The most terrifying part was the sound, a low, continuous grinding, like rocks being crushed together, came from inside his chest. His bones were rearranging themselves, becoming denser, heavier. He dropped to all fours, his hands and feet splaying outwards, the knuckles cracking as they thickened to bear his new weight. His flannel shirt ripped down the back, revealing skin that was darkening, coarsening, sprouting thick, dark fur. He was becoming a bear, a massive black bear, its form still half human, half monstrous. But what truly broke my mind was what was happening to his head. Antlers, thick and gnarled like dead branches, began to sprout from his temples, pushing through the skin with a series of wet, tearing sounds. He was not becoming one animal. He was becoming a nightmarish amalgamation, an impossible creature from a forgotten mythology, the body of a bear, the antlers of a great stag, and the cold, black, intelligent eyes of something that was neither. My dad and I were frozen, our rifles forgotten in our hands. The creature that had been my Uncle Thomas let out a roar, a sound that was a horrifying blend of a bear's rage, an elk's bugle, and a man's scream of agony. It took a single thunderous step towards us, and then it collapsed, its massive body hitting the forest floor with a heavy, final thud. We approached cautiously. It was just my uncle again, lying in the fog, his eyes closed, his face peaceful. But his body was twisted at an impossible angle, his limbs broken, and protruding from his temples were two small, hard, bony nubs, like the beginnings of horns that had not had time to grow. That's what the coroner would later call unusual calcium deposits on the skull. I know the truth. The thing in the woods, the ancient spirit of the hunt, had been wearing my uncle for weeks, maybe months. It had hollowed him out, using his body as a vessel, a disguise to lead us, his family, deep into its territory. The fog was its hunting ground. The transformation was its final, terrifying reveal. But something had gone wrong. The human body, my uncle's body, was too weak to contain the raw primal power of the creature it was trying to become. His heart had given out, unable to handle the strain of such a monstrous, impossible metamorphosis. We were not saved by chance. We were saved by the simple, tragic frailty of the man it had chosen to wear. Story 4. The new neighbor when a new family moved into the old, dilapidated house at the end of our cul-de-sac. We were all relieved. For years, the place had been an eyesore, a blight on our quiet suburban neighborhood. The new neighbor was a man named Mr. Ashworth, a tall, unnervingly cheerful man with eyes that were just a little too bright. He kept to himself mostly, but he was always out in his yard at night, digging, planting, and staring up at the moon. My house was next door, and from my bedroom window I had a perfect view of his backyard, which bordered a large, dark nature preserve. The first time I saw it, I thought I was dreaming. It was a hot, humid night, and I was woken by a dog barking frantically next door. I looked out my window and saw Mr. Ashworth in his yard. He was on all fours, and he was running. He was chasing his own dog, a small terrier, around the yard, not like a man playing, but like a predator. He moved with a horrifying, loping gait, his limbs seeming to stretch and bend in the moonlight. His movements a grotesque parody of a four-legged animal, the dog yelping in terror. finally squeezed under the fence and ran off into the night. Mr. Ashworth stopped, raised his head, and let out a long, low howl that was not quite human and not quite canine. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I saw Mr. Ashworth putting up lost dog signs. He looked perfectly normal, just a sad man looking for his lost pet. I told myself I had been dreaming a vivid, stress-induced nightmare. But the nightly activities continued. I would see him digging in his yard, not with a shovel, but with his bare hands, clawing at the earth with a frantic, animalistic energy. I saw him once catching a rabbit and eating it raw. Each time I saw him, he seemed less human. His posture was more stooped, his movements more jerky and angular. The true transformation was not one of body, but of territory. I started noticing strange symbols, painted in what looked like red clay or mud, on the fence posts between our houses. Small, geometric patterns, like something out of an ancient textbook. Then I saw them on the trees at the edge of the preserve, on the storm drains, on the curb. He was marking his territory. He wasn't just moving into a house. He was claiming the entire neighborhood as his den. One night, I was watching from my window, hidden behind the curtains, as he performed his strange, nocturnal ritual. He was standing in the center of his yard, his head tilted back, staring at the full moon. And then he began to change. It wasn't a full transformation into a werewolf or some other movie monster. It was far more subtle and far more terrifying. His skin seemed to loosen, his muscles shifting and bunching beneath it. He dropped to his hands and knees, but he didn't shrink. He remained man-sized, a horrifying hybrid of human and canine. His face contorted, his jaw unhinging slightly, his teeth looking long and sharp in the moonlight. He was a man, forced into the shape of a beast, or perhaps a beast wearing the ill-fitting skin of a man. This creature, this Mr. Ashworth, then began to pace the perimeter of his yard, his head low, sniffing at the symbols he had painted. He was reinforcing his claim. I realized with a sickening lurch that my house, my yard, my very bedroom window were all inside the territory he had marked. I was not a neighbor watching a strange man. I was a prey animal, living inside a predator's cage. The final, horrifying proof came a week later. My own dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, started acting strangely. He would whine at the back door, his fur raised, and refused to go into the yard. One morning, I found him cowering under my bed, trembling, and on his paw, painted in the same red, muddy substance, was one of Mr. Ashworth's symbols. It was a mark, a brand. He wasn't just claiming the land. He was claiming everything in it. My dog, my house, and me. I am writing this from a hotel room 60 miles away. We left in the middle of the night, taking only what we could fit in the car. I don't know what Mr. Ashworth is. A skinwalker, a madman, or something else entirely. I only know that he is not just a neighbor. He is an alpha predator, and I have no doubt that, as I speak, he is pacing the borders of his newly expanded territory, sniffing the air. and wondering where one of his new possessions has gone. Story 5. The failed ceremony. I should not be telling this story. The words themselves are a betrayal of a trust so profound it is considered sacred. But the silence is a greater sin. The silence allows the monster to continue wearing the mask of a holy man. I was a young man then, an apprentice to a great and powerful Hattaway, a medicine man of the people, my own grandfather. He was a man of immense spiritual strength, a bridge between our world and the world of the spirit. But he was fighting a war I could not see. He had grown ill, not with a sickness of the body, but of the soul. A darkness had taken root in him, a parasitic entity that was slowly consuming his life. He said he had been cursed by a rival, a practitioner of the corpse way, a skinwalker. He was losing the battle. As a last resort, he decided to perform the ultimate, most dangerous ceremony, a ritual of violent, forced exorcism, designed to rip the evil from his soul. He asked me to be his witness, to be the anchor to this world while he journeyed into the dark. It was an honor I should have refused. We were in his hogan, the air thick with the smoke of burning sage and cedar. He sat in the center, chanting in the old tongue, his voice growing stronger, more resonant than I had heard it in months. The temperature in the hogan plummeted. The fire in the center pit flickered and died, plunging us into a darkness that was absolute. But the chanting continued, and in the blackness, my grandfather began to glow, a faint, sickly, silver light emanating from his skin. Then came the sounds, a chorus of 1,000 whispers swirling around the hogan, speaking in a language of pure hatred. And beneath the whispers, a low, wet, cracking sound. The sound of my grandfather's body beginning to break. His glowing form began to contort. The exorcism was beginning. He was trying to force the entity out, but the entity was fighting back. It was not content to simply leave. It was trying to take the vessel with it, to tear it apart from the inside out. My grandfather's body began to transform, not into one shape, but into a chaotic, glitching vortex of a dozen different animal forms at once. His arm would elongate into the wing of a great black crow, feathers sprouting from his skin, only to collapse back into a thick, furred leg of a bear. His face would stretch into the lean, snarling snout of a wolf, then melt into the horned visage of a great stag. It was a battle of forms, a war of flesh, each transformation a violent, agonizing failure, a testament to the two powerful wills fighting for control of a single body. A sound ripped from his throat, a sound that was a man's scream, a wolf's howl, "Bye!" and a crow's call, all laid into one mind-shattering shriek of agony. The silver light around him intensified, and I could see the entity, a shadow within the light, a thing of pure blackness with burning red eyes, fighting to maintain its hold. My grandfather, in a final, desperate act, spoke to me, his voice a chorus of a dozen pained voices. The ash, boy, the sacred ash. Now, I fumbled in the darkness for the small leather pouch he had given me. It contained a special ash meant to bind the entity once it was expelled. I threw it at the glowing, shifting mass in the center of the hogan. The ash hit him, and for a moment the transformation stopped. The silver light flared, and the black, shadowy form within was ripped from his body with a sound like tearing reality. It hovered in the air for a moment, a creature of pure, malevolent shadow. The exorcism had worked. My grandfather was free, but the entity was not bound. In my panic, I had been a fraction of a second too late. The shadow thing, instead of being contained, let out a shriek of triumphant rage and shot back towards my grandfather's body. He screamed, a final human sound of utter despair. The silver light around him was extinguished, consumed by the returning darkness. The fire in the pit roared back to life. The whispers stopped. The hogan was silent. My grandfather was sitting in the center of the room. He looked fine. He was himself again, whole, the lines of sickness and pain gone from his face. He looked at me and smiled, a calm, gentle, reassuring smile. "It is done, my boy," he said, his voice my grandfather's voice, full of its old warmth and strength. "The darkness has passed." But as I looked into his eyes, my blood ran cold. The man I knew, the Hatui, my grandfather, had kind, wise, brown eyes. The eyes that were looking at me now were not brown. They were a flat, hard, and ancient black. And in their depths, I could see two tiny, burning embers of crimson light. The exorcism had failed, or rather, it had succeeded. It had expelled my grandfather's spirit, leaving his body an empty, perfect vessel for the ancient evil that now wore his face. The war was over, and the wrong side had won. I am telling this story now because he is still out there, revered as a great medicine man, a healer, a protector. But I am the only one left who knows the truth. I am the only one who knows what S really looking out from behind my grandfather S eyes. And I know that the most terrifying transformation is the one that no one else can see.